planning guide to help carry out your wishes.
Call now. 1-800-491-1933.
Many Republicans in Congress are praising President Trump's decision to strike a Syrian airbase, but that's not the stance some took when it was President Obama asking to take action. Let's show you. Congresswoman Diane Black, for example, said she'd vote no on Syrian intervention back in 2013. That was when more than 1,400 people were killed in a chemical attack. Now, however, she's thanking Mr. Trump for taking, quote, decisive action. Congressman Pete Olson also flip-flopping, tweeting he doesn't support military action back in 2013. Now, with the death toll at 89, he is saying the strike means no more red lines. With me to discuss, former CIA counterterrorism analyst and the host of the Buck Sexton Show on The Blaze, Buck Sexton, and CNN political commentator and former mayor of Philadelphia, Michael Nutter. Buck, to you first, what's changed between 2013 besides who's in the White House?
Well, first of all, when we look at what's happened here, the Obama legal team specifically said that they thought that this would have been okay if President Obama had gone ahead and done it. I mean, are you asking me to speak about specific members of Congress and how they've changed their minds? I mean, I don't speak for congressmen.
But why? What could be a possible explanation besides just the politics of it all? Given that back in 2013, there were more than 1,000 people who were killed in a similar chemical weapons attack. Those same people, Democrats as well, at the time were pushing back against taking military action. Now there seems to be growing support. How do you read that?
I think that obviously parties will look at what's going on with the president at any given time, and they will take positions that aren't necessarily consistent with what they've done in the past. President Obama was going to go through with this. He decided not to do this because he then had this deal to get rid of chemical weapons in Syria, which we all recognize didn't really matter all that much because chemical weapons were in fact used, despite John Kerry saying that the chemical weapons had been 100% removed, I believe was the quote. So I don't speak for members of Congress that are now changing their minds on this. Honestly, that wasn't my purpose in sitting here. I thought we were going to talk about the strike in Syria specifically and what it means for U.S. foreign policy there. I don't really care much about what an individual member of Congress says about this strike, and I certainly am not going to play well, they're not hypocritical. Some of them, of course, are hypocritical, just like the people we've seen in the Congress recently or in the Senate on whether or not they should use the nuclear option for a nominee for the Supreme Court or for the court, whichever court we're talking about. So I just don't see it as a necessary part of the discussion right now. If you want me to speak about Donald Trump, I can do that.
Well, let's talk about what you see as the next step in terms of the U.S. involvement in Syria. What would you do?
Well, I think the administration has to first see what the response is. I mean, Russia is cutting off some communication about these airstrikes, and Russia is obviously upset about what happened. Now, on the domestic political front, this is useful for, I think, a lot of reasons. One of them is that it starts to quiet down people that have thought for a while that Donald Trump is in the pocket of Russia, but it also shows that there's now a willingness to use force. The credible threat of force is what a lot of diplomacy is based on. And so that's a good step. What should happen next? I'd like to see further action to defeat and destroy the Islamic State first. I don't want to see a U.S. military intervention against Syria, against Assad, I should say. We would need to deal with the Islamic State first. And I think that the administration has shown due caution up to this point, and the strike is pretty universally praised, except by a few people who hate everything that Donald Trump does, and some people on the right who are just very understandably concerned about the prospects for a full-scale intervention.
Mayor, do you agree?
There's no question that from a military standpoint, clearly this was a strategic action. It certainly sent a message. You send 60 Tomahawk missiles in the air and 59 of them hit their targets. That's a pretty serious message. My concern now is message delivered and received. What's the policy and where's the strategy? Most news accounts seem to indicate that the president saw these horrific photos of, certainly adults and even more impactful children with this incredibly barbaric action. And suddenly, a 180-degree turn away from everything that he has said in the past with regard to Syria, and suddenly we're sending Tomahawk missiles in the middle of the night. So, okay, now what? You own this, and it is your responsibility. You sent a message to Syria. You sent a message to Russia. You also sent one, I guess, to North Korea and China, our allies, the UK, France, and Germany. What are you going to do next? And I think that the American people are really owed an explanation beyond this was barbaric and we needed to do something. What are we getting into? I think Jen Psaki talked about this earlier. What are our next steps, and what is our goal? Get rid of Assad, stop the civil war, try to decouple Syria from Russia? We don't know answers to any of these questions, and I'm not even sure who's developing that kind of strategy and game plan.
And Buck, what does it do long term when you send these missile strikes over, and now we see the next day or a little over 24 hours, Syria is back at it, bombing its own people in the exact same place where these chemical attacks happened?
Well, clearly it's not enough to stop the Assad regime, and it's not something that's going to have a lot of impact from a military perspective. This was to send a message, and this was to make a point about...
Can the U.S. be one and done?
No, I mean, the U.S. can't be one and done when it comes to Syria, and obviously we've had a long-standing air campaign, I think one that's been too slow and too cautious, but a long-standing air campaign leading up to the Trump administration against the Islamic State in Syria. I do have concerns about where this goes next. I think the administration understands that the moment that you have a major power like Russia and its troops in harm's way as well, it certainly complicates matters a great deal. So the next steps here, the administration is going to be working out, I think, in the days ahead. And it should be noted that the enemy gets a vote, not just Assad, but also very important allies for Assad, like Russia and Iran. The Iranians have a whole bunch of places where they can hit us, and they even have some plausible deniability with it. The Russians, we'll see, they've cut off communications. If the Russians decide they're going to play hardball with their surface-to-air missile systems, it could get a lot harder for us very quickly there. So it's not as simple as just, here's the game plan, let's execute. I think the administration, with General Mattis at the Pentagon and with McMaster as the National Security Advisor, have some key players in place to help make the proper strategic decisions based upon what happens in the days ahead, because we can't see the future just yet.
But Mayor, can the administration act unilaterally, or is it time to bring in Congress and get them involved?
Well, if I were a member of Congress, I would want to know, as they say, what in the world is going on. I'll leave it to the constitutional scholars to debate whether the president has to or not. It just seems to make common sense that you want a unified United States of America. That certainly includes the Congress. But again, I think, the public has a right to know what are we getting into here as well. And so bringing Congress in, getting some kind of sign, show of support, a vote for something, whether they have to or not. This is a moment where, America needs to be unified, but also I am concerned about this lone, kind of cowboy kind of action. We hear these statements, well, if somebody doesn't do something about this, then we'll do it ourselves. The UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, well, we did what we did and we're prepared to do more. Well, what does that mean, right? So we need a unified show of force, and the message part is, like I said, is over. Message delivered, message received. What's the real game plan here? How are we moving forward with a coalition of folks, and that America is united and also understands what are we trying to accomplish? What is the goal here? Are we trying to get rid of a leader? Are we trying to stop the civil war? Are we trying to defeat ISIS? Are we trying to do all of that? Are we trying to send a message to Russia? This will be the moment for Mr. Trump and his folks to actually stop talking to the Russian ambassador and a bunch of other people who have gotten them in trouble. So I think the president is starting to see the world maybe a little differently and for what it is, and that this is actually a real serious job that he has been elected to, and it's time for leadership and a little less tweeting.
All right, Michael Nutter and Buck Sexton, thank you. We'll have you back to continue the discussion.
Sure.
We do have some breaking news out of Afghanistan we want to get to. A U.S. Special Operations soldier that's east of Kabul. A U.S. military official says this happened during an operation against a branch of ISIS there. There, as you know, are still some U.S. troops in Afghanistan, about 8,400 or so. This is the first U.S. combat death there so far this year. And other news just into CNN, a deadly